Another interesting option for white here is knight e5. We will see this knight move in many different positions, but right now it has the goal of getting a slightly improved version of positions with h4, as explained by Gelfand in his book Positional Decision Making. So the point that bishop b7, now white plays h4, the most principled. Although, as I said, for example, bishop e2, knight b d7, and now many moves transposed to other chapters, like queen c2 transposes to chapter 7, castles transposes to chapters 4 and 5, and h4 transposes to chapter 6. But h4 is the best way to try to save a tempo for white. And here, black has two options. The best move seems to be g4, because rook g8 is the other move here, is the other option. It looks playable, but in my analysis I realized that it's not a good move for black. It's simply bad. Now white has the strong line, h takes g5, h takes g5, and the knight takes f7, which is a very strong idea here. King takes h7, e5, and the rook is already coming to the attack. So knight d5, rook h7 check, bishop g7, and you can find on the database some games in which the game was the result was a quick draw after queen h5, king f8, queen f3, king e8, queen h5, king f8. But I discovered in my analysis that there is a novelty, very strong novelty for white, which is knight e4, queen a5, and king e2. And the analysis showed that white has a big advantage here. You can check later, but I'm pretty convinced that rook g8 is not a playable option for black here. So g4, it's the remaining option. And now if white plays bishop e2, then knight b d7 is the right answer, transposing to chapter 6. But knight takes g4 is the way to keep the position on the ideas started with knight e5. So knight takes g4. Knight b d7 was seen in some games, but don't think it's the best way to contest white's move order. So let's accept the challenge and play knight takes g4, queen takes g4, and the queen takes d4. Keeping the anti-Moscow spirit, black has a pawn up, but white is ahead in development and try to play for the initiative. So rook d1. I think other moves can be more useful for black here, can be harmless. Like for example, bishop e2 is a normal developing move, but it gives an important tempo to continue black's development. So knight d7, and now rook d1 has not the same effect because of queen g7. Now this is better than queen f6, because the point is that queen f4 can be met by e5. And in case of queen f5, bishop c8, the queen might be a bit weird on f5 here. So an interesting option, an interesting try was queen f4, played by Morozevich. The point is that white takes the f6 square away from the black queen and threatens an invasion on c7. So, for example, if knight a6, rook d1, and queen g7, we have transposed to an inferior move order for black after rook d1. But Caruana was black here and played very principled with bishop b4. But now rook d1 was a very creative continuation. In case of something like rook c1, this is very passive and allows black to organize his forces in a good way. For example, knight a6, controlling c7, a3 and bishop e7. The bishop has won a tempo because it was to be, it went to before and went back to e7. Then rook d1, queen f6, and black is totally fine here. Actually, black is already better because there's no problems in development for black. So rook d1 was played, bishop takes c3, and here Morozevich played king e2. At first sight, an irrational move, but it's very, very creative and also very ambitious. Probably the most ambitious for white. It was also possible to play b takes c3, queen takes c3, and rook d2, or here king e2. But black has an amazing resource here, which is queen b2, and if rook d2, then c3. This is a very, very beautiful resource. After rook takes b2, c takes b2, and there is no way to stop this pawn from queening, from promotion. But okay, white has queen f6 at least regaining the material. p1, king h8, with a strange, a sharp position, but probably equal. But Morozevich played king e2 right now, trying to save a tempo to take on c3. And Caruana was probably a bit shocked by this reply and played queen e5. But after queen takes, bishop takes e5, bishop takes, and rook h7, king e3 gave a very nice compensation for white, for the pawn. An improvement over this game would be queen f6. Because after b takes c3, then queen takes f4, bishop takes f4, knight d7, taking the control of e5, and if something like g4, f6, has no problems like in the game to finish the development, to organize black's pieces. But I think Caruana probably discarded the discontinuation in view of queen c7. That seems very dangerous. But black can play here bishop takes b2, queen takes b7, and castles. With a very complicated position because white is winning a rook on a8, the rook's trapped there, but the king on e2 suddenly offers, surprisingly, this king on e2 offers good chances of counterplay for black. For example, queen takes a8, then c3. The pawn is also helping to create strong counterplay. And the analyses are very interesting, and the position is of course very tense. But I think black's chances are not worse here. You can check later all the analysis. But this was Morozevich's creative attempt queen f4, involving this very unusual move king e2. Rook d1 is more natural. And here, a previous experience by Caruana went wrong. A previous Caruana game went very wrong after queen g7. Because now queen f4, threatening queen c7, then knight a6, bishop e2, bishop e7, castles, knight c5, and now e5. This was still very good for white. White had a very interesting compensation, and Aronian as white scored a nice win against Caruana. The main point here is that the queen stays out of play on g7, and this is enough to conclude that the right retreat here is to f6, because the queen is not as much out of play as on g7, and it takes f4 away from the white queen as well. So white plays e5, winning a tempo, and also preparing to bring the queen to a better square on d4. Queen f5, queen d4, but bishop e7, of course. And here white plays a4, still trying to increase the tension and force some concession by black. Also, another game by Aronian as white went b3. But here black has a very active response, c5. Then Aronian reacted badly with queen e3. Queen d2 is the best retreat for the queen, But the analysis also suggests that black is fine with correct play after a6, b takes c4, and b4, as now black has a very dangerous check on e4. The game went queen e3, probably thinking about these ideas to avoid the check on e4, but still black keeps the active play, knight c6, b takes c4, and knight b4. And white was already in serious trouble here. The game went knight queen f4, knight c2, king e2, queen takes f4, and b takes c4, and black was simply a pawn up. The game was drawn after Aronian put a stronger resistance against Kramnik. So a4, and here I think castles is the most practical solution for black, offering the b5 pawn, because now black is able to complete the development and to activate the pieces. c5 is possible here as well, but after queen d2 it's very important to play a6 and not b4, as after knight b5 white had a big advantage in view of the threat of knight c7. And a6, a takes b5, a takes b5, knight takes b5, queen a4. It leads to a very complicated position where both sides need to find the precise moves, and the analysis show that black is okay, but it's more complicated to remember and also to find the moves. Therefore, castles looks more practical to me and also easier to play. Because now, for example, if a takes b5, black plays c takes b5, and knight takes b5, knight c6 seems already pleasant for black. After something like queen e3, for example. Then there is the same idea as the game Aronian Kramnik knight b4, and the white's already in trouble. Knight d4, knight c2, exchange knights, queen c3, but now black played queen a4, threatening bishop b4, and the white was under serious pressure in this position. So this already gives a very active play for black. So queen e3 was played, attacking h6 and also stepping out of moves like rook d8. But here knight a6, and I like this position because black is developing quickly, and the main problem for black in such positions is to be behind in development, to be late in development. Suddenly the position can be dangerous for white as well. For example, a takes b5, knight b4 is already losing on the spot. Also, after rook d7, which seemingly wins a piece, but bishop b4, rook takes b7, knight c5, and the queen b1 is coming with a decisive effect, are dangerous positions for white. Queen takes h6 here is also bad, but white can try this in view of b4, bishop takes c4, setting the trap b takes c3, bishop d3, winning on the spot. But black has a precise response here, rook d8, taking d3 away from the bishop. So rook takes d8, rook takes d8, rook takes, and knight e2, knight c5. Even after castles, knight takes a4, queen e3, c5. Black has a much better position in view of white's very bad coordination. So white should still continue developing and look for castling as soon as possible as well. But here, this position has occurred once in tournament practice, and I found an improvement on black's play, which is knight c5. In the game, black tried to maneuver the knight to d5, but the analysis shows that the knight has better prospects on c5. For example, if castles, then black is much better here, simply better here after b4. it's important to keep this square available to advance the pawn, to disturb white's coordination. For example, knight a2, then queen a4, very strong move, because there is no way to avoid the exchanging queens. And if queen takes e4, knight takes, rook d7, looks like black's losing a piece, but bishop c5 is a tactical way to keep the bishop safe because of knight g3 here. If knight takes b4, then queen takes e3, f takes e3, a5, the knight goes back to a2, but now bishop a6, knight c3 and rook b8, and the white's position looks already very unpleasant here with rook b4 coming and similar ideas. So a takes b5, c takes b5, knight takes b5. At first sight, black's position doesn't look great, but here there is queen a4, which is a very important point. Black's forcing the queen's exchange, and gets a good position. So if queen takes e4, knight takes, and after something like bishop takes c4, rook c8, and black's becoming very active, like b3, knight takes g3, f takes g3, bishop g2, rook g1, bishop b4, king e2, bishop a8, and I don't see problems for black here. If knight takes a7, then rook c5, threatening to trap the knight and also winning the e5 pawn. So queen a4, bishop f4, queen takes e3, bishop takes, and here, among other options for black, knight d3 seems a very practical solution, because black sacrifices a pawn, but gets the bishop pair and an active position with some endgames coming in which the bishop pair neutralizes the pawn advantage for white. For example, if your rook takes d3, bishop a6, then rook d7, bishop takes b5, rook e7, and the rook a8 seems enough compensation for the pawn, because white has problems to develop the king. And also after knight d6, rook h, b8, rook d3, bishop a6, rook d3, and bishop d8. Again, black has a very active position. Bishop d4, bishop a5, bishop c3, takes, rook b1, rook b2, and rook c2. In both cases, in these both lines, I think black's compensation looks enough. So after bishop takes h6, rook f d8, and there is white should be careful with the threat of rook d5. For example, rook h3, rook d5. So castles, but rook ac8, and here black is still a pawn down, but there is a very strong passed pawn on the 6th rank, and it can be supported by the bishop, and also the rooks are supporting the pawn and are very active, especially the rook on c8 threatening to invade on the 7th rank anytime. But of course bishop takes h4 doesn't work here because of knight d6, and if bishop a6 defending the pawn, then rook a1 and the bishop's trapped. But this position, it's not forced, but it's a good example of the dynamic possibilities for black in this line.